I'd like to talk about one of the fundamental concepts for collaboration, and that's the concept of interdependence. We in the West like to think of ourselves as rugged individualists and put a large value on independence. But even back in the days of the pioneers, they had a thing that they called barn raising, where neighbors helped each other and were dependent on each other for safety, for building things, and in hard times for sharing resources. So we're a lot more interdependent than we think. And in fact, it is that interdependence which brings people together for collaboration. I often ask people, why are you at the table to collaborate here? What is it that you're looking for? And people's first answer is often, well, I'm looking to see if we can come to an agreement. But I dig a little deeper and I ask, well, why is it that you need an agreement? What is it that you're trying to get here? And then people begin to realize that they need something from the other parties at the table. They need either political agreement or agreement not to take legal action, or they need some agreement to provide some kind of resource, expertise, or money, or other kind of resource. They need something from the other parties. Otherwise, it wouldn't be worth the effort to sit down meeting after meeting to try to work things out, to work an agreement out with the other parties. So you need something. You're there at the table because you need something from the other parties. And here's the thing. The other parties are there for the same reason. They're there to get something from you, and it might be an agreement, it might be a compromise, it might be resources, etc. It's the same kinds of things, but they are there because they need something from you, and that's what we mean when we talk about that interdependence. There's a line of research that I find really interesting, because we tend to think that our destinies maybe are interdependent or are independent of one another when in fact they're not. And the research is that if you're happy, that the likelihood of your immediate neighbors being happy is statistically higher, that they will have an increase in their happiness if you're happy. And interestingly, their friends, that is, the friends of your neighbors, will also, at a statistically significant level, be a little happier, just because you're happy. And that begins to show how we're all connected, and how all of our systems of governance, and how each of us as individuals really are connected with one another, and our fates are connected to one another. One of the great examples I like to use of interdependence is a project in Lakeview, Oregon, a rural part of Oregon that's heavily dependent upon the timber economy. And a few years ago, the timber economy was not doing well in that town. And it had been affected by really the timber wars, we called them, between the environmental community and the Forest Service. And basically, it had halted any kind of logging in that local national forest. And the town was in danger of really going under. So some community leaders brought folks together and said, we think that maybe there's some opportunities here for us to collaborate. And they ended up having a major but local timber company say that they would put in a major multi-million-dollar investment into a new mill that only milled up small diameter logs, the kind of logs that they try to get out of the forest often to make the forest more healthy, and to leave the big trees to continue to grow. This company said that they would be willing to make that investment, but only if the Forest Service would agree to provide a stable supply of those small diameter logs over the next 10 to 15 years. Well, the Forest Service was ultimately willing to provide those logs, or that supply of logs, through what they called stewardship contracts. But they said they were only willing to make that commitment if the environmental community were to agree not to litigate these stewardship contract sales, which they had been doing. So they went to the environmental community, and the environmental community said, well, we're willing actually to make that commitment ourselves, that we aren't going to sue, because we think that this is going to be good for the ecology of the forest, because the forests were really quite unhealthy for a number of reasons. And they saw a benefit to getting these small trees out of the forest and kind of opening the forests up a little bit. Well, there was one condition, however, and that was that the environmentalists wanted to make sure that the mill was sized at an appropriate size where it didn't have such a voracious appetite that it took all the small trees, small diameter trees, and then looked around and started needing to have the big trees come in as well. And in turn, the company said, yeah, we can agree to that. So what you had was a situation where each of those three parties was dependent upon the other for certain actions, certain agreements, in order to make something happen that was ultimately in everybody's benefit. And today, we have an operating mill in that town, a new operating mill employing more people and milling up those small diameter logs because of that collaboration. And that collaboration happened only because people recognized their interdependence with one another.